Hello, thanks everyone for joining after the coffee break. Hope everyone's caffeinated. I'm an interdisciplinary scholar working at the intersection of urban planning, ecology, and geography. And I'm really interested in how cities can better support wildlife. As cities continue to grow, these are becoming very important spaces for conservation. And today, I want to talk a little bit about how we can study urban landscapes and understand which aspects of it are shaping where species can persist. And looking at it maybe in a different way, looking at cities as three-dimensional landscapes and what those impacts are to birds. So increasingly, cities are conservation battlegrounds. And what I mean by that is urban land is going to triple by 2030, causing extensive habitat loss. In the US alone, we're going to lose 10,000 square kilometers of habitat. And that's a big number to wrap your mind around. So, to put it in context, imagine stacking 12 New York cities. That's how much habitat we stand to lose. Now, I don't want to paint this as a doom and gloom picture because it's not. And I'm at a Symposium, Cities and Environment, full of a room full of folks working on these issues. And we know that cities are not ecological wastelands. Cities support a lot of different species, high levels of biodiversity. These images right here are from LA's biodiversity indicator species program. And shout out to Nurit Katz because I think she took most of these photos. So you'll see her name on there. Hey, Nurit. Um, what these are is community members go out and they take wildlife observations and they upload it to a community science platform called iNaturalist. And it's incredibly important data. It lets us know where species are doing well and where they're not. It helps us understand which areas we might want to, conserve or restore. But of course, we can't know where all species are at all times. That would require us surveying every square foot of Los Angeles multiple times. That's impossible. So we have tools like species distribution models. And what these models can do is they can take the data we do have, the observations like, say, from iNaturalist, and then pair that with environmental data at that location, and then make predictions on where these species are likely to occur based on that environmental data. But for these models to be effective, we need good comprehensive environmental data that's really getting at why the species are there. What are the environmental drivers? And most of the data to date has been two-dimensional. That's what's been available. And we now have access to 3D data, which is a great opportunity. It's increasingly being used when it's available in certain areas, but it is challenging to work with. It's computationally challenging, but it's an opportunity that we need to look into because cities are complex 3D structures. Okay, we have buildings of different heights and forms, big, tall, dense canopy trees, the sparse trees. If you look at this image of the 2D data versus the 3D data, on the 2D side, we see that the buildings and the trees look the same. They're being counted the same. When you look on the 3D side, you see there's actually a lot of variation that is being lost, that's being collapsed. And this matters because research is showing that 3D aspects of the city impact birds. Shapes flight corridors, window collisions, nest sites, and that birds use vertical space in urban environments. So what this really is making the case for is that we need to include 3D measures of our urban landscapes in our species distribution models if we really want to capture the most suitable habitat areas in the city. That brings me to the research question I'll focus on today, which is how does the inclusion of 3D measures of the built environment enhance habitat suitability predictions for birds? Now, this is one small piece of a larger dissertation project where I looked at 3D urban structure and its relationship to habitat suitability and wildlife connectivity across 4 cities, across multiple species. But for the purpose of this talk, is I think we need to really focus in, I'm going to focus on the city of Los Angeles, habitat suitability for one particular species, and that's the western bluebird. Um, they're one of LA's indicator species, and an indicator species is selected because either its presence or absence or behavior tells us something about the overall health of the ecosystem. They're an insectivorous thrush. You find them all over Los Angeles, open woodlands, um, in the suburban landscapes. I saw a couple last week, and they're cavity nesters. They use tree holes, nest boxes, and importantly, they travel short to medium distances. So this is really a great test case to look at how they react to fine scale urban structure. So to test this question, I built two species distribution models in Maxent, which is a machine learning model. I built one using conventional 2D environmental predictors, and then one that included 3D environmental predictors on top of it. This started off with 26 environmental predictors, three of which were derived from LiDAR, 3D building, looking at building volume at the pixel level, looking at it within 400 meters, and then standard deviation of building height. Ran a correlation analysis, and then removed all the highly correlated variables, which ultimately gave me 11 environmental predictors to put into these models. And then for the species observation data, I used iNaturalist, 1,500 research grade observations for the western bluebird. Do anything else, apparently. It ends here. Did the Maxent species distribution models and did a 10-fold cross-validation to make sure that these are good models. Assessed them with 5 performance metrics. And then compared them in 3 ways. Compared them on their performance, compared them on which variables were driving their predictions, and then the distribution of habitat suitability values to see if they were really predicting different patterns. And here are the results of the two models, and you'll see under the area under the curve train and area under the curve test, this is seeing how well the model predicts. Both of them do quite well. Like the benchmark for a good model is 0.70, so they both perform well. And the difference between these two is very minimal. That means that it's not overfitting, so it can predict with new data. So that's also great. But I want to point out that the 3D model does show some improvements here across all 5 metrics. So showing that when you include 3D measures of the built environment, you get a better performing model. Let's dive into the results a little more. Another thing that we can look at, like why the 3D model might be performing better, is the model gain. This is something you get out of Maxent, and what it's saying is the higher the gain, the more variation it's explaining and where you can find western bluebirds. As you can see, the 3D model has a higher value compared to the 2D model, and what's driving that is the building volume metric. That was the most influential predictor, contributing 36% to that model. Now, stepping aside from performance, looking at does it change the spatial patterns of what's considered suitable habitat, what's not. I think just visually you can see clearly with the 2D model, there's just a lot more green and yellow values showing more suitable habitat compared to the 3D model. So the 3D model seems to be predicting less suitable habitat. And then I zoomed in here on a case study area. It's the Elysian Park area. And this area is a good test case because it's a big green space, important habitat. But it's also surrounded by a range of urban morphologies. So from single family housing, multifamily housing, to the high rise of downtown. So good to see if including 3D built form really influences habitat suitability variation. And as we can see, they are quite different. And when you do the Wilcoxon sign rank test, statistically, it does show that the 3D model is statistically different and actually predicts less suitable habitat for the Western bluebird. So the takeaway here is that the 3D measures have improved model performance, but it also changes the spatial picture. So I'll leave you with 3 key takeaways. 1, including 3D built environment into these models improves our predictions. It predicts significantly lower habitat suitability. And so if we ignore building height and we ignore volume density, we risk overestimating where suitable habitat is. And by including all this information, we can get more accurate habitat maps, which then better informs urban biodiversity planning conservation initiatives. But of course, there's much to improve upon here. So I'm going to talk about next steps. 3D vegetation structure. Vegetation is incredibly important. I'm going to be integrating LiDAR-derived vegetation structure. This is, I think, going to give us even more accurate habitat suitability maps. More species. I did a range of birds in my dissertation, but I think including mammals will be really important because then we could start to see where responses converge, where they diverge, and start to think about multi-species conservation planning. And then integrating explainable artificial intelligence into the workflow. Machine learning models are great. They've enhanced our predictive capabilities, but they're black boxes. Explainable AI will be able to then break this down and show us what the actual relationships are between each of these variables and species presence and what the thresholds are, right? And so I'll just leave you with my end message is that cities are 3D ecosystems, and when we measure them that way, we get a better understanding of where species can thrive, and then a better understanding of where we should do targeted conservation initiatives that will have the greatest impact. And I just want to close and thank my dissertation committee. Dr. Kirsten Schwartz is in the audience. Thank you, Kirsten. Kat Superfisky from LA City Planning and Rafaela de Ura from the UCLA Hoffman 2 cluster team. I couldn't have done this without them. Thank you for your guidance. And if anyone's interested in these methods or would like to collaborate, please contact me. I'm happy to share all data and would love to collaborate. Thank you.
We have time for one question.
Oh, yeah. That's really cool stuff, Morgan. I'm curious. I just like to hear your thoughts about what we gain when mapping at that resolution versus like just plotting data from INAT or eBird and seeing where Western bluebirds are from people seeing that. What do we gain from doing this approach?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. It gets down to trying to understand the underlying drivers of why those species are there. And what's great too with the species distribution model is then we can also, with climate change, as these factors start to change, then predict where species might need to go or which areas we might need to conserve. So we can project into the future.